Mini episode 858 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode number 858. You've got FDH managing partner Rick Morris with you here today, along with a gentleman who is the founder and CEO of the Sports PR Summit, and specifically for what we're talking about today, also the founder, owner, host of Sports Business Radio. So I speak, of course, of Brian Berger. It's great to be able to get him on the show for the first time here, and we're going to be getting into present headlines in the sports business world this summer. By the way that the headlines go, by design of the day, it seems like we're going to be hitting a decent amount of NBA, but we'll talk about anything and everything relevant. And again, a segment that I've been looking forward to doing. Brian, it's a pleasure to get you on the show. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on.
This is going to be excellent. I really am looking forward to this, and of course, the encore climax to the NBA season. Cards on the table. Painful for me as a lifelong resident of America's North Coast. So my Cleveland Cavaliers bowing out in fairly tame fashion in the NBA Finals here. So I guess before we get to the off season, let's kind of start with that. The trilogy, I was really struggling to try to think of any kind of parallels on a global basis. If you figure that we've been in this internet globalized sort of world roughly about 20 years or so with the interconnectedness, when I'm just looking at this and the fact that I'm picking up Facebook friends by dint of following the Cavs Facebook page, like from the Philippines, I mean, this thing was truly nuts as far as all over the world, Cavs, Warriors. I mean, can you think of any kind of precedent for what we'd seen? Because I don't think the NFL quite has the global reach, especially when you're talking about Asia and the huge populations over there. I think you've almost got to go back to the 70s with Muhammad Ali's fights, but those were all over the world. I struggle to think of any parallels, especially in modern times, for Cavs Warriors 3.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the NBA has done the best job of any U.S. pro sports league at globalizing their product. I have been in the Philippines, I've been to China, I've been to Tokyo, I've been to Europe, and you see NBA all over the place over there. And the other U.S. pro sports leagues have not had quite the reach on a global scale as the NBA. So what does that mean? It means great TV ratings globally, not just in the U.S. It also means lots and lots of people engaging on social media, following the NBA's accounts, following the team accounts of the Cavaliers and the Warriors. So it's been great for the NBA. And now, the free agency period has turned into almost as exciting as the season itself, where people are counting down the hours until July 1st, and when free agents can be signed. And, social media is ablaze with conversation about who's going where. So the off-season for the NBA has become almost as interesting as the season itself.
It really, really has. And that's one of those things, too, where I have to tell you, looking back to last year, one of the things that I found to be so mind-boggling, it was gratifying to see my Cleveland Indians make the big run they did into the World Series, unfortunately to come up a little bit short, but really for that to have nipped Game 7 of the NBA Finals last year, Game 7 of the World Series topped it, which I never would have believed in a million years had been the case, because I felt like it was only in the last 2 years or so that it was really dawning on me how much the NBA had really passed Major League Baseball by. We talk about how during the 80s or 90s, at some point in there, certainly by the 90s, that the NFL had. And it really took me until, I'd say, the last 2 years, and maybe it was having LeBron back in Cleveland and seeing the big global phenomenon of the NBA on that level, to realize how much the NBA had surpassed MLB in that way. And that's one of those things, too, where I wonder how much of that has to do with the fact that, like you said, it truly is a global phenomenon in a way where even even the NFL is playing catch up to them in that arena.
Well, I'm pretty fortunate. In the last 6 months on Sports Business Radio, I've gotten to sit down in person and have long conversations with David Stern, former NBA commissioner, and with Adam Silver separately. So, I'm a huge fan of both of theirs, and I used to work for the Portland Trail Blazers. I've got a pretty heavy NBA background, so maybe what I'm about to say is biased, but again, I think the NBA does the best job of any U.S. pro sports league in globalizing their product. And I've seen it with my own eyes. When you go to China and you see billboards everywhere in stores that have faces of NBA players, and you don't see any other. There's no Tom Brady or Peyton Manning. There's no Bryce Harper or Mike Trout. It's all NBA players, and I think the NBA is enjoying the ratings and the eyeballs on social media that come with that.
I want to ask you, while we're talking about something international here, this will be kind of a cul-de-sac because I certainly want to get back to talking NBA, but when we're talking internationally and we're talking about Asia, this seems like as good a point as any to bring this up. And I would be very interested to know, in your conversations with a lot of the movers and shakers out there, I don't really hear anybody looking at any contingencies here when we're looking at Asia, and specifically when we're looking ahead to the next Winter Olympics in about 7 or 8 months here. I've had it in the back of my mind for quite some time here, and I think we had a little scare right around Easter there as far as hostilities possibly becoming imminent then. I've had it in the back of my mind for a long time. We may not get a Winter Olympics next year. I mean, certainly it's not going to happen. If there was a breakout of hostilities tomorrow, you wouldn't have things cleared away in time. People wouldn't think it's appropriate in time for that. You've essentially got to look at a landscape remaining more or less static through next February in order to get this thing off. And it could happen. We've gone on a long time the way that we are. But I just keep thinking in my head, a lot of times we get these things that happen. It would probably be trivializing the loss of life to say at the worst possible time, but certainly from the IOC's perspective, at the worst possible time, if something were to break out. What is the sense of what might happen from the TV networks on down to all of the big business entities sponsoring the Olympics? What's the fallback here if we don't have an Olympics?
Well, first I'll say, I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know what's going to happen. I know, the world being what it is, there's always the fear that there could be terrorism or there could be something that prevents a country from hosting games at the last second. I'm not part of the IOC, so I don't know what their conversations are as far as contingency plans for backup venues or for TV networks that are supposed to host the games. So I wouldn't really be able to tell you. But with the amount of money that's being spent, you would hope that there's plan B, C, and D in place. So if anything happens, you know what's going to happen. We know September 13th, IOC is going to award the 2024 and 2028 games, and that LA and Paris, in some order, are going to get those two games. So we know that's happening. As far as who's hosting next year and is there going to be anything in the world that happens that may prevent those countries from hosting? I just don't know. I hope that there's nothing bad that happens, but the world we live in today is very unpredictable. And, obviously, again, if you're these event organizers, if you are a TV network, you better have contingency plans in place.
Exactly, and that's the TV networks have got to look at contingencies. As far as the games themselves, I don't think it's going to be a thing of like, oh, well, hey, Bismarck, North Dakota said they'd be willing to host it on short notice. I don't think we're getting any kind of plan B as far as the actual staging of the games. But yeah, the networks, they'll have to come up with something. Again, keep our fingers crossed first and foremost for no loss of human life and that everything manages to get settled peacefully, however unlikely that may seem on today's landscape. But again, going back to the NBA and what we were talking about there, it's a thing where, like you said, it's just sort of set up to dominate the sort of sports media landscape because of the global presence in social media, but it's the middle of the summer. Outside of MLB, you don't have any of the big four sports going off right now. So a situation leading up to July 1st and a thing where, again, much like the Stanley Cup Finals this year and the last couple of years, the NHL gets big-footed in all this because, oh, by the way, July 1st is also their kickoff for free agency. Not that anybody in the the mainstream, unfortunately, is talking much about that. I'm a hockey guy as well, so I don't like to see that. But you get some big bursts of news coming out with Phil Jackson leaving the Knicks. That seems to have been an escalating situation, building from the end of season controversy with Porzingis. Jackson floating trading Porzingis at the NBA draft, which seems to have been a turning point for his tenure decisively in New York there. His ongoing battles with Carmelo, you've got that going on. You've got CP3 making his big move away from the Clippers, surprisingly going to Houston in that deal, where Houston does the classic 4 quarters for $1 deal and just sends them out to LA. So, like you said, even when there's not games going on the court, the NBA is able to Bigfoot a lot of the other sports that are happening in this country in a way that really only the NFL is able to kind of pull off. The NFL does this as far as the NFL draft becoming first and foremost every year, and the NFL is used to Bigfooting other sports, but the NBA, it seems like, is getting increasingly good at it themselves.
Yeah, I think, again, the offseason is fantastic for the NBA. With the Phil Jackson firing, you're right, it escalated. I think that James Dolan stepped in and said, look, Phil, we're not trading our best asset, Porzingis, and they want to have him there long term. Carmelo, I don't think you want to buy him out. You want to trade him and get something for him. I don't know if you're going to get a lot for him, but you want to get something for him instead of just buying him out and letting him walk. And he's going to go to probably either Houston or to Cleveland or someplace that he's a third or fourth piece on that team. So, but the other thing is Phil Jackson badmouth players, and you can't do that and expect that free agents are going to want to come play for you. So here, free agency starts July 1st, and Phil Jackson's still in charge there. It wasn't going to be a good thing for the Knicks. Not that they've had a lot of success in free agents, but they're going to have zero success. Players talk to players, and you can say what you want about Carmelo Anthony, but he does have respect around the league. And if he's telling people stay away because Phil's crazy or he's going to badmouth you too, or they're afraid of James Dolan, they're not going to come. And they had to make a change. I would go out and I would hire David Griffin in a heartbeat. I don't know if I'm David Griffin if I want that job with James Dolan, but I think he would be great there. You don't have to give up compensation for him like you would Toronto's basketball operations person, Masai. So David Griffin would be great there. They should at least have a conversation with him. And then, as far as the trade today, it was a little surprising for a lot of people. I mean, Chris Paul to Houston, we kind of heard that in the last 24 hours, but I think a lot of people thought he was going to stay in LA. He was going to take that extra $50 million, sign the Supermax, and do that. But it sounds like the Clippers weren't going to offer him the max deal. They didn't want to pay him $45 million when he was in the 5th year of that deal. And that's going to be the interesting thing for some of these teams is Chris Paul and LeBron and some of these guys are in their 30s now. If you sign them to a max deal, you want to be paying them $45 million when they're in year 5 of that deal. For LeBron James, I think you have to because he's a rare player, but he also sells a lot of tickets, merchandise, and everything else. But for some of these other guys, I don't know. And Jerry West is new with the Clippers, and he probably came in and looked at that thing and said, if we re-sign Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, I don't know that we're any closer to a championship, and you're going to be spending a ton of money, and we're not going to win anything. So, the thing that's interesting about the NBA right now is you've got the teams that are trying to align themselves with superstars like Houston, like potentially Boston, to catch the Lakers, or not to catch the Lakers, to catch the Warriors. But then you've got other teams like the Bulls and quite possibly the Clippers and others who are saying, you know what, we're going to start from scratch and we're going to rebuild with youth. And owners always like to hear that because it saves them a lot of money. They're not going to be paying luxury tax. So there's kind of the haves and have-nots in the NBA right now. So it's interesting to watch.
Very much so, and your perspective about Jerry West is interesting. because I do believe it on hearing you say it, albeit it's sort of the opposite of what my first thought was, because my first thought was this was something where Chris Paul sort of forced his way out the door. Jerry West just got there. I was thinking of that gif from The Simpsons where Abe Simpson walks in the whorehouse. He sees that Bart Simpson is the maitre d', and he casually turns around and walks back out the door. I was thinking of Jerry West this morning for some reason when that trade hit. But like you said, maybe he's the one that drove it. Maybe he thinks if they clear the decks and they get $80 million to play with next summer, maybe they can do some stuff. I'm kind of dubious, but that might be their best plan of action.
Yeah, I think the worst place to be in sports is the middle.
Yeah,
and you're not going to compete for a championship. You're not bad enough to build through the lottery, and that's where the Clippers were. They were in the middle, so they were never going to have great draft position. They weren't going to be able to get great players through the draft. The only way they were going to do it was through free agent signings, but they already had a high payroll, and they weren't having success getting free agents to come to the Clippers. I mean, when's the last free agent signing they had that moved the needle there? So I think Jerry West came in, and I'm sure he talked to Steve Ballmer, the owner, and they probably said, look, we love Chris Paul, but we don't love him enough to pay him 5 years and over $250 million. So I think these owners are really looking at their checks and balances more than they ever have, in addition to wanting character guys on their team.
Absolutely, and I think that the way that it's going there, I had said previously that if Jerry West was going to continue re-engineering the front office there for the Clippers, that he would be wise to bring in David Griffin in some capacity, maybe convince Doc Rivers to give up the GM tag, whatever the case may be. Your thing about David Griffin going to the Knicks makes sense from the Knicks' perspective, as you said, not so much from Griff's perspective. Personally, for me, a very frustrating kind of a thing, as one of the best GMs in the league and one of the guys who really, when you talk about being maxed up against the cap, a guy who could just keep making magic happen, making moves out of nowhere because he knows all the loopholes. And unfortunately, the team owner wishes to cosplay late-era Al Davis and meddle that much himself. So we find Griff out the door here in Cleveland. That will be somebody else's gain, to be sure, wherever he ends up going. Oh, by the way, something to clip and save potentially, a GM who LeBron knows how very, very good the guy is. Put that tweet out when he was on his way out the door about, hey, even if nobody else appreciated what you did, I did. So that may be something, a little bit of an early kind of a thing for next year here. I think that LeBron is probably still sufficiently soured on the Dolan crew in New York. I don't know that Griff would be enough to get him to look at the Knicks, but that might be an interesting harbinger for next summer. Where does Griff go, and is he with a team that's going to have the room to chase LeBron?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting because I think that tweet was sent to an audience of one, and it was Dan Gilbert.
Yep.
And, I know a lot of people around LeBron, and I will be very surprised if LeBron is a Cleveland Cavalier next summer. I think he's leaving. I'm not going to have a prediction on where he's going to go. I just think he delivered that championship that he hoped to deliver to Cleveland. He and Dan Gilbert do not like each other. And I think LeBron feels like, he can leave and go play his twilight somewhere else. And, of course, he does have a home in Los Angeles, so there's been a lot of speculation there. But I just don't see he and Dan Gilbert coexisting long term. And, if LeBron leaves, it's going to be a lot like what we're seeing with the Clippers. Like, Kevin Love may already be traded. Does Kyrie stay? Like, it's going to be the domino effect. If those guys are there because of him, and then Cleveland would be back to square one. So, it's interesting. If I'm Boston or I'm Miami or I'm someone in the East and I'm pitching these free agents, I tell them, look, we could be 1 year away from the Eastern Conference being wide open. I mean, if Boston doesn't get Gordon Hayward and Paul George like they're hoping, they're going to miss their window. They may not sign Isaiah Thomas next summer to a huge contract and kind of make the same decision that the Clippers made with Chris Paul today. So, it's going to be interesting, but the one thing that is certain is Golden State has raised the bar. And, you're either a team that's going to chase him, and if you chase him, you better stack up with 4 or 5 stars on your team to have a chance, or you're going to unload your stars and you're going to go back to the bottom and you're going to say, well, we'll be competitive when Golden State's window is closed in 5 years, but I'm not going to pay a lot of money in the meantime because we have no chance to beat them.
Absolutely. And again, I'm kind of a skeptic with Curry and Durant about to turn 30, that there's going to be the longevity for this thing that the rest of the world thinks. These things don't generally work out as long as everybody is convinced that they will. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But just in closing, what I'd like to ask you in general is, in terms of the NBA, that deal that they signed with the TV networks more or less was obsolete the minute the network signed it, as far as what those rights were worth, the tripling of values. ESPN was probably having buyer's remorse immediately, TNT maybe to a lesser degree. So we're going to be seeing the big sports leagues' rights coming up in a lot of cases in the early 2020s. Going to be a lot of sticker shock, I think, at that point in time. Talk about the streaming services. Silicon Valley has still got bottomless pockets. Is that going to be a thing here where we finally see the integration into the mainstream as far as the streaming services becoming mainstream, maybe getting NFL games on Sundays, NBA finals? Do you think that these circumstances are setting the table for that to happen maybe in the next deal?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had Tom Rinaldi, the terrific reporter from ESPN, on my show this week on Sports Business Radio. So I urge people to go to iTunes and listen to that, because Tom was just fantastic. I think he's the best storyteller in sports. But to answer your question, I think streaming is definitely where it's going. You know, if you have Apple TV like I do, I think HBO has one of the best streaming services available. So you can pay $14.99, you can watch HBO live, you can watch it on demand. But ESPN is finally in the process of developing an app, and they're losing 600,000 subscribers a month. So obviously they need to do things on multiple fronts, and one of the fronts is they need a really great streaming service, because they call them the cord cutters, then there's the cord nevers. So I have a 12-year-old daughter, and yes, she watches TV, but she's much closer to a cord never than a cord cutter, because she watches on her iPad, she watches on her mobile device. That's where everything is going. So if you're a league, if you're a team, if you're a network like ESPN, you better go where your audience is, and if you don't, you're going to be a dinosaur quickly. So as you said, Silicon Valley has a lot of money. We've seen what Twitter did with the Thursday night games last year. Amazon has the games this year. I think you're going to see a lot more live streaming. And as soon as a league or a team jumps in with, okay, here's the streaming service, you can watch streaming now versus having to watch broadcast, I think the others will replicate it. But so far, no one has kind of dipped their toe in that pool. I thought Steve Ballmer might do it with the Clippers. I thought Paul Allen might do it with the Trailblazers, but no one has done it yet. And I think it's coming soon. And if not, TV is going to find that more and more people are tuning out because they're watching on their mobile devices.
Absolutely. And the only caveat that I would make to all of that when we talk about cord cutters, I got a couple of friends who call themselves cord cutters, but one of them's got Sling TV, one of them gets stuff through PlayStation. And I was like, you know what, you guys are poser hipsters, You're still getting cable, but you're getting it through another service. You can call yourself a cord cutter if you want to, but if you've got ESPN, the USA Network, and all these other things, you ain't no cord cutter. But regardless of that specific point, Brian, a pleasure to have you on the show. I knew we would cover a lot of great subject matter. We certainly did. Thank you so much for your time. Love to have you come back on and talk about more sports business topics with us.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. It was a great conversation. Thank you for being on. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to FDH Lounge mini episode number 858.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and the periodic table of elements.